I don't think behavioural economics is the silver bullet, but it has applications in particular areas and for particular projects that many of us get involved with. And I think there's sort of two areas. One is an area where we ask to help around the assessment of risk or how people make judgments about a future possibility. But if you use the lens of behavioural economics to talk to people about pensions, you would realise that anything that they said or they claimed to do in the future, you can't really be sure that they would do that. They might say they're going to take out a pension, they're seriously thinking about it, they've been recruited to participate in the research because they're really, really keen on pensions. The reality is that they might not do it for an ever-moving horizon. The lens of behavioural economics would give you a number of concepts that you would start to hear when you talked about them. And one is the power of now, which means that we always, as human beings, much more likely to want instant gratification than we are about some sort of future benefit. So if you're going to ask me to pay £30 a month now for some gain when I'm 75, it's going to feel like a loss, right? Because I need my money now. So that's sort of one lens, is understanding the sort of how important not to feel loss immediately is. Another concept might be to think about heuristics, which are the kind of shortcuts, rules of thumb that we use when we're making decisions. There are many, many in behavioural economics. One of them is called hindsight heuristic, which means that you assess the likelihood of something happening by the degree to which it's happened in the past. So you might have had a pension contribution in the past and it might have not done very much, in which case you're very unlikely to ever want to do one again. Another heuristic is a recency heuristic, which means that you tend to remember vivid examples that other people may have told you. So if somebody's had a bad experience with a pension provider or a pension, you might think that, well, I'm not going to do that, because the vivid negative experience comes up in your mind and that immediately decides you against it. Lots and lots of heuristics which lead us often to make decisions very quickly. Sometimes they're effective, but sometimes they're detrimental to our long-term well-being. I think one of the fundamental principles of behavioural economics is that people make decisions comparatively, not absolutely, and also relatively. So they're always making a decision or a choice relative to something else or in comparison to something else, not in absolute ways. So what that means is that you have to understand the context, their context in which they're making that decision or displaying the behaviour. So apart from the question why, which they're not aware of, you can ask, what exactly did you do? Where were you? What was it like there? Who was with you, or who else was doing this? How? So understanding the sort of steps, you know, the effort that they might have had to do or the lack of effort. And so by building an understanding of the context, you can truly understand better why they might have made the decision that they did without having to ask them directly. Another area in which behavioural economics is really useful is in terms of how people make choices, how they decide that they prefer X rather than Z, Y or Q. And again, there are a number of different concepts or principles that are really helpful. Mental accounting is one. When one's talking to people about the money they have either to save or to invest or something, they have mental piggy banks, all of which have got money which should, if you were a classical economist, be equal, right, in value, that this money in that thing should be equal to this one. But in fact, people attribute different emotions to their different little piggy banks, mental piggy banks. So one little piggy bank can be, this is for my child, every year we put away £150, and by the time they're 21, they're going to have sufficient money to be able to take a gap year or whatever. I'll never touch that, okay? This money is an inheritance I got from my mom, and actually, you know what, it's just for me, and I'm thinking that actually I'm going to splash it on a holiday this year because she would have loved that. This money is actually set aside for a deposit for a house because we want to buy a house, and so I'm saving very carefully on that money, and I wouldn't like to touch that. That one I sort of keep there. And then I've got a little pocket of money here that I get from work and, you know, part-time job that I've got. And, you know, that I just use for gifts for my kids. And maybe I'll have a punt on the horses or do the lottery, right? So that's an example of how people make decisions, because in each of those cases, with each of those pots of money, the decision is different about, you know, what you might prefer to do with it. That's an example called mental counting. The other one is choice architecture, which you find time and time again. And you give people 4 or 5 alternatives to choose from, whether by size or quantity or something. They'll tend to go, they avoid the extremes, they go for somewhere in the middle. So if you alter the sizes of those, you sell more or people eat more. There's no such thing as a neutral choice. And you know, restaurants know this because with wine menus, for example, they know that people avoid the wines at the top, the most expensive. They'll also avoid the wines at the bottom, the cheapest, either because they don't want to be thought to be mean or because they really think they're rubbish. So they choose either 4 or 5th from the top or 4 or 5th from the bottom. And restaurateurs put the wines that they make the most profit on in those 2 positions. So again, you know, the way a wine list is presented can affect the choices that you make. I don't know who's actually doing it. I know we at Acacia Avenue are doing it. And we are doing it in different ways. In one way, we're using it as an analytical tool, as a way of listening to potential consumers or customers, how they talk about their behavior. And another is by actually working with particular clients on problems which suit it. And more clients are beginning to think that maybe there is something in this. So they're willing to experiment, sometimes with methodologies, sometimes in, you know, just tighter, more behaviorally focused research rather than, you know, this kind of very, I don't know, broad-reaching diagnostic sort of things. So we're committed to exploring it.